Record. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Tonight, we are learning for the Refuah Shalema for a dear friend of mine and a member of our community. His name is Avram Ben Baluma. He needs a Refuah Shalema, dealing with some pretty nasty stuff right now. And hope and pray Hashem sends him a Refuah Shalema and makes that family whole. And this will be a blip on the rest of their history in the family, Bezrat Hashem. So we missed, I think, 2 weeks. Last week, I couldn't speak. This week, thank God it's better. It's still not 100%, but it's getting there. And we are late in chapter 4 on Parak Dalet in Nehemiah. We're going to pick it up, the Pasuk Yud Gimel, number 13. But just as a reminder, what we discussed last time was this whole situation of they're in the middle of rebuilding the wall around the city. They're not rebuilding; they're more like fortifying various areas. And what's happening is that our wonderful dear Jew haters, Sanballat and his crew, make our lives miserable. And they try to attack us. They try to speak bad about us to the king. They do all the things they can. And we sort of, not even digress, but we talked about how all these things to this very day are the same thing. Jews cannot protect themselves. We talked about the book, The World Loves Dead Jews. So we've talked about quite a bit of how the story, the narrative in Navi repeats itself over centuries. We're going to finish the chapter, and then we're going to see actually that the next chapter could have been written literally today. It is absolutely amazing. I've been teaching Navi for many, many, many years, and it never, ever ceases to amaze me how current the message can be, whether overt or covert in Navi, of what we need to know or see or is just unfolding before our eyes. But on a very positive note, for those of you who are even tangentially aware of the Navi, Zechariah, and if you're not, just open it up one day, just flip through it and read it, especially the last couple of chapters. And what is described in Sefer Zechariah about the time of pre-Mashiach and how things are, the whole world will know Hashem, is happening right now. It is absolutely phenomenally amazing, beautiful to see. So let's take a look just now read the last few psukim in Parak Dalet, chapter 4. We're going to start again with Pasuk Yud Gimel, number 13. He's just now said, he's basically giving everyone their, quote, marching orders. They're going to continue working. They're going to continue fortifying the wall around the city. They're going to continue protecting the city. So let's read, starting with Yud Gimel. Va'omar ha'chorim elaskanim vel yeter ha'am. We left off, I think, one pasuk later, but we'll pick it up here, or a couple psukim after this. But I'm still going to pick it up here. I said to the noblemen and to the other leaders of the people, the rest of the people, and I said to them, there's a lot of work to be done, and it's also very spread out. If you remember, I'm not going to put it up on the screen. If you remember the map, we looked at least 2 or 3 times that the whole wall was being built in sections, not being built, was being fortified, was being fixed, was being repaired around the whole perimeter of the wall, including the gates, including the tops that were over the gates, all being fortified. But the problem was that they're also scattered all over places. Nifradim ala choma, they're scattered all over the wall. Everyone's like here's a group of people, and here's a group, and here's a group. Now, under normal circumstances, that wouldn't be a bad thing. That'd be fine. The problem is that they are under attack. They're under attack in some cases physically, which we'll see, and also politically. So they need to protect themselves. So he says the following. Whenever you hear, wherever you are, the place that you are, that you hear the shofar, if you hear the shofar blast, you should gather to where that place is that you hear it. Hashem will fight for us. So what's he telling Bnei Yisrael? You may be at this point of the wall working on it, and you may be over here, but all of a sudden we're being attacked over here. We're going to blow the shofar here. Whatever you're doing, drop it and come back here and come over here. But he also tells us Hashem's going to fight for us. Why do we have to have both? Hashem's going to fight for us. Hashem's going to fight for us. Why say, oh, come over here? It seems kind of silly. Silly may not be the right word, but it's very important. We know al hanes. We do not ever rely on a miracle. We know that Hashem is always protecting us. Hashem is, he doesn't sleep nor slumber. He's always protecting us. But we still have to do our due diligence. We still have to get out there, because to say that all we need to do, and we need people sitting and learning Torah, but all we need to do is sit and learn Torah all day, and then Hashem will protect us, and there won't be any missiles will hit us. Unfortunately, in the current environment that we are in, is a fool's errand. We need both the Torah learning, and we need the people out there protecting us, physically and spiritually. In a sense, it's the same idea here. He's telling the people, we're going to be attacked. And whenever you hear this shofar blast, come to where we are, where you hear it from, and we're going to gather there. And while we're there, don't have what to worry about. Hashem's going to fight for us. Next pasuk tedvav. So we continue working. Half of the people are holding a romach is like a spear or a lance. Some were standing there, and what they did was from the dawn until sunset, they stayed there with the lance, like on guard, ready. Next, Ted also, I said to the people at that time, everyone, along with their servants, should sleep in Yerushalayim. So what we did was we would work by day, and we would stand guard at night. The parallels of some of this story, especially this next pasuk, parallels the early days of the state of Israel, pre-state Israel, during the time period of Migdal Chomah. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, tower and walls, look that up. Very similar concept. Next, last pasuk. I, my brothers, my servants, or any of the guards that were with me, we didn't take off our clothes. We didn't change our clothes. Or even right now, that's not exactly clear what this means. But I'm just going to go with neither by the water. Maybe it means they didn't even wash themselves. So what's happening here at this very last pasuk is not that they didn't not go home to change out of fear. They stayed for a matter of konenu, to be prepared. We know that no matter how good your protection is, meaning Hashem, and we said that we have to do our own due diligence. We have to also protect ourselves. You can't leave the place completely unattended. And to show the importance of the job they were doing, which was to fix this wall, which would ultimately serve both for kavod, but also more so for the protection of the city and its people, it was important for the people to see that Nehemiah and his immediate entourage were constantly stationed there. They didn't leave. Was it a day, 2 days, 3 days? Don't know. Which brings us to a very interesting chapter we're going to come to in a moment. What we have, I'm going to put one slide on the screen for a moment. Perek Hay. Perek Hay, or chapter 5, is an interesting chapter. There's no such thing. I shouldn't say there's no such thing. For the most part, we have not really learned any chapter that somehow isn't somewhat interesting. Even when we had the honor roll of names as just names, there were some interesting things. But this one we're going to deal with, in the first part of the chapter, has to do with social justice. And I said in the introduction tonight that this perek could be written today. And I mean, literally, the topic of this chapter is very much an issue right now. Whether it's the fifth election, fourth election, the third election, the second election, or the first election in the last 3 years, or it's been the cottage cheese revolution, or it was the homes, the people were pitching tents in Gan Sacher or in the streets of Tel Aviv, or it was migrants, or it was all these things that have been occurring, and yes, it's happening around the world in many places, and more power to what's happening in Iran. And I wish them all the luck and hopefully overthrow the government there. Bezrat Hashem. I'm talking about Israel right now. The idea of social justice, I'm not talking, by the way, some people misconstrue or mistranslate. Social justice is not really tikkun olam. Tikkun olam is a term which comes from many places, especially Aleinu, the takel olam b'malchut Shaddai, has been hijacked by I would say the conservative and or reform movement. I can't say with certainty. I think more in the conservative movement as the goal of what it means to be a good Jew. I'm speaking very loosely. I'm not speaking for them. I'm just telling you what's a very popular, well-worn and used phrase in the communities of tikkun olam. It's in some cases and within some people, and I've had this discussion with people in the reform community in the United States, that as long as, it doesn't make it, you don't have to do mitzvot. Mitzvot, that's archaic, but tikkun olam is our job here as Jews in this world. Okay, so they got part of that right. Tikkun olam is important. The taken olam b'malchut Shaddai, we just said that. But social justice and tikkun olam are not necessarily the same thing. No, I should say not necessarily. They are not the same thing. Social justice may be a subcategory. So how does social justice play a part in this parak? Let's take a look. I'm going to take this off a screen share. Actually, let's get it to the first slide. Actually, no, this is a little bit of an introduction. For those of you who don't come a lot or often to the class, many of the slides I put up come from the commentary known as Da'at Sofrim, relatively modern, passed away not that many years ago, prolific, and wrote, I believe, on all of Tanakh. I have some of the volumes. I don't have all of them. Any person who ever comes across an old volume of this, the Da'at Sofrim, please, if you ever see it at a book sale or anything like that, please just send me a picture, and I'll more than likely end up buying it if I don't have it. Anyways, I don't know how I digressed to that. So here's his introduction. It's like this. Now remember, in Tanakh, the 24 books of Tanakh, that we talk about Ezra and Nehemiah, but it's considered one book. We finished Sefer Ezra quite a while back. We said there are a lot of parallels between Ezra and Nehemiah. So in his introduction to this parak, he tells us as follows, the Da'at Sofrim. LeEzra huv'u tlunot al hamatzav shebein adam lemakom. In Sefer Ezra, which we talked about at length, Ezra was faced with a lot of complaints that had to do with the situation of Ben Adam lemakom. That is how Jews were interacting with God. A lot had to do, of course, with marrying foreign women, non-Jewish women. The Nehemiah al hamatzav shebein ani la'ashir. The situation that now is going to be faced by Nehemiah is going to be a different one. This is going to be the haves versus the have-nots, upstairs, downstairs, poor, rich, however you want to say. Both Ezra and Nehemiah dealt with the situations quickly. They dealt with it strongly, and they were both successful. Now, before I even go on, I want to comment on one thing here. I know this is a commentary. This isn't Navi, but it's important. I want to pick out specific. I like the words he uses here. All of us at one time or another, whether it was in school, whether it was in the discussion with another person, whether it was at a kiddush, the topic of manhigut or leadership has come up. And what makes a good leader? A good leader, some of the qualities are these three words right here. Actually, the first two words. When a situation warrants it, not every situation warrants speed, not every situation warrants dealing with something strongly. Sometimes it's just a matter of time will tell. Sometimes it's a matter of dealing with kid gloves. But other times when it is potentially catastrophic to the fabric of the community, then it needs to be dealt with. It needs to be dealt with quickly and properly. There is a line in Macbeth. By the way, I don't mind quoting sources like Shakespeare. I figure if Rav Aaron Lichtenstein Zatzal could quote Shakespeare, Ani HaKatan, I could mention something because it fits here too. There's a statement in the beginning, I forgot which act, says, when 'tis done, when 'twere done, and 'twere well, 'twere done quickly. meaning if something needs to be done, it needs to be dealt with. It needs to be dealt with now. And he's telling us that both Ezra and Nehemiah dealt with their situations, that Ben Adam Lamakom case of Ezra, and on Nehemiah, the case of the poor and rich situation, which we're going to see in a few minutes when we look at the text. Because in both situations, both in Ezra and Nehemiah's time, it wasn't just a matter of complaints. They were also open to suggestions or open to guidance. But there are pitfalls. And in both situations, whether it's Ben Adam Lamakom, Ben Adam Lechavero, it required a good, proper hand guiding them, who was the leader. This topic, which we're going to talk about, is going to have to do with the very difficult economic hardships that were imposed directly or indirectly from one Jew onto another. He says the topic is brought up now during the time of the building of or the fixing of the wall. It's possible that there was a connection between this outcry about the lack of social justice. Again, we'll see more details when we read the chapter, along with the building of the wall. Because remember, the wall building, the wall repairing, kind of interrupted day-to-day life. So not only are they having financial problems, they don't have a normal day. Their schedule's all mixed up. Skip that. It's possible that because of the building of the wall and the tension that came as a result between the Jews and other people, it's possible that the newcomers to Israel were having a harder and more difficult time when they first arrived. Okay, so he basically is saying here that we're coming now into a situation, what's the word I'm looking for? A perfect storm. And what's the perfect storm? We have a lot of new olim. You have economic disparity. You have a massive public works project, using modern terminology, of course, the massive public works project, which is the repair of this wall. And suddenly all these things start to come to a head. What we're going to do is I'd like to read through the entire chapter. I may mention a couple of questions along the way like I've done before. And then we're going to go back and start asking some questions and read some comments from the Dot Sofer. Okay, so let's take a look, please, at beginning of Perek Hey, Pasuk Aleph, chapter 5, Pasuk number 1. But there was a tremendous outcry from the people and the wives of the people. In this case, it means the men and the women. And who against whom was this outcry? It was against their fellow Jews. There were those who would say, we have many, many children. We need to get grain in order that we may eat and live. So I'm going to mention one question. And there were those saying, it's kind of like starting in the middle of a sentence. If you ever remember learning English in school, you were always told you don't start a sentence with and. So what does it mean? And some were saying. We'll come back to that. And we see the same thing in Pasuk Gimel and in Dalet. In Pasuk Gimel, number 3, and others were saying, Sidotenu uchramenu uvatenu anachnu orvim. We have had to, I'll explain first what this means, and then I'll come back to the Pasuk. Let's say I want to, I need money. So I can do is I can take a ring. I'm not going to ever do that, God forbid, but take my wedding ring and go to a pawn shop and pawn the ring. And then hopefully I can get it back. If I get the money for it, I can buy it back. In other cases, it might be an entire field that I put up as collateral for a loan. In other cases, I may be in debt, and therefore I don't have the money to pay. So I allow the usage of my field that will be covered up to a certain amount of money, and then that person uses my field. And this is what was happening here. Almost every one of those things was happening. We'll see. Let's take a look. Gimel. Those who saying that our fields, our vineyards, even our homes, we've had to pawn, we've had to put up for collateral. And how come? We needed to get grain to keep away the hunger. They actually had, evidently, the poverty was so bad for some part of the community that they were forced to put their house up in Hak. Dalit, number 4. Others were saying, Lavinu kesef l'midat hamelech. We have had to borrow money against our fields, in order to pay the king's tax. This was again, it says, we're used to, when you get a paycheck or you work for yourself, you pay tax, maybe tuach lumi. If you live in the United States, you pay something called FICA. You have to pay all kinds of taxes. And generally speaking, in a normal country, I'm not talking about a country where it's ruled by despot, but a normal country, the taxes, generally speaking, somehow, one way or another, almost always benefit you. If we didn't have taxes, we would not have the roads fixed. We wouldn't have many things at our disposal. So the taxes do, in fact, do good for us. Question is, are they fair? Are they not? Not going to get into that. But in certain times of history, you had to pay a tax to the king, depending on your station in life. Especially if you talk about the Middle Ages, you talk about England, you talk about England, the properties that were under the rule of the church. Your taxes could be X amount of goats, literally. It didn't have to be money necessarily, it'd be X amount of goats, depending on the size of your field, depending on the size of your crop, depending on the size of your amount of animals that you had, and you had to pay it. Now, you had to pay it, otherwise you were going to prison. So they said that in this time, there were taxes that had to be paid to the king, and they didn't have the money, and they had to borrow against their property. So they had to put that up for collateral, so they didn't have access to their fields. And they're telling Nehemiah, we're in trouble. We are starving. We don't have access to our fields. We don't have access to our vineyards. We don't have access sometimes to our homes. We may have access, but we don't own them. Pasuk Hey, number 5. Vata. Now here comes the social justice outcry. Kivisar achenu b'sareinu. We are the same as our brothers. Our flesh is the same as their flesh. Kivnehem banenu, like their children are our children. And what's happening is we are causing our sons and daughters to be put into slavery. And some of our daughters are already subjugated, and we don't have the wherewithal, we don't have the power to get out of this. And our fields and vineyards belong to others. This is the claim. This is the complaint. Now, you have to wait a second to stop and ask yourselves the question before we go further. And again, just now I'm reading the paragraph, but I want to put some ideas and thoughts into your head as we read through it. Is that really, this is a rhetorical question, even though we may know some of the answers ourselves, but I'm asking it anyways. Is that really the job of the leader to have to deal with? Maybe. Yeah. Who said that it was fair? Who said that life was fair? They're the haves and the have-nots. Is this supposed to be a democracy? Is this supposed to be a theocracy? Is this supposed to be a monarchy? What kind of leadership is this? It's a Navi who's the leader. So what exactly is the leadership here? Is there supposed to be? Are they? Should the rich people have been saying just like, okay, you know what? Let's just on with it. Let's just give them their stuff back. If they loaned money, if they had money coming to them, and should they just forget about it? So these are the questions that we will deal with. But let's see first how Nehemiah deals with it. Vayichar li me'od. He was very angry. He says, remember, a lot of Sefer Nehemiah is in first person, as we saw in the beginning of the book, especially. Vayichar li me'od, I was very angry. Kasher shamati et za'akatam, as I heard their crowd cry, V'et ha'dvarim ha'eleh. I heard these words, these complaints. So here's what he decides to do. Vayimalech libi alai. This is another amazing proof of what a tremendous leader Nehemiah was. I'm going to explain to you what that first word means. Vayimalech. Use an example from Hilchot Shabbat. On Shabbat, we know that one of the isurim, one of the things you're not allowed to do, is to carry. By the way, I could just translate the word. That I want part of what I like to do is to not just teach, but to educate. That's my little in parentheses statement here. And this word vayimalech, what does it mean? So in Hilchot Shabbat, we know that you cannot carry from Reshut HaYachid, from private domain, Reshut HaRabim, to a public domain. Now, most Jewish communities around the world have an Eruv. And especially if you I did not in Chicago grow up with an Eruv, but especially if you grow up with an Eruv, the concept of the idea of not being allowed to carry on Shabbat is not only foreign, it's not even understood. I remember there was one time I was somewhere for a Shabbat. The Eruv happened to be down. And they were talking, people were asking each other, what are we supposed to do? We can carry our key though, right? And we can carry the kids to shul. No, you can't carry anything. Well, how are we supposed to deal with the key? Well, like every other community did until you built an Eruv 100 years ago. So the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat deals with all kinds of concepts and ideas. But in order to be chayav for the malacha, that you did the malacha, something the isur was done, it has to be what's called melechet machshevet. You have to have intent to do it. Meaning, let's say, for example, I take this cup of water. I'm in my house on Shabbat. There is no Eruv. I walk outside on purpose. Then I carry from the private domain to public domain. I did the isur of hotza'ah, carrying or taking out on Shabbat. But what happened if I was walking and my plan was to walk from this corner of my house to the other corner, and I just kept going. I walked out of the house. Okay, that could be something called mitaseh, also called nimlach. Nimlach means you thought about it, or you changed your mind, or pondered. It has multiple meanings. But what does it mean here? So let's take a look at the text. Vayimalech libi alai means I pondered the matter carefully. I thought about it. One of the things that a leader must do when faced with a difficult situation is not react or respond with a hair trigger response. I have a friend who, not in Chicago, it's a different city, a friend who is the principal of a day school. That's an East Coast. And he has a rule. He says that if a group of students come to him with a petition about something, they have 100 signatures, he will tear it up in front of them. He says, you want to discuss, you want to present an idea, come to me. We'll talk. I don't deal with petitions. What does that mean? He wants not just see a bunch of names on a piece of paper. He wants to hear and it's a good idea. I'm not sure I would do that. But the idea being, he wants to encourage dialogue. What happens with dialogue? Sometimes it starts off with yelling and screaming. That's not dialogue, that's just yelling and screaming. Other times situations are presented and a solution is found. But in order to find a solution, if you're a true leader, whether it's a school or a community or a business, a CEO, you're the head of your department, whatever you do, unless it requires an instant emergency response, if it's something that's going to affect other people's lives besides your own, you need to think. The Mishnah tells us in Pirkei Avot, "Havu metunin badin." You have to be calm. A judge in a Beit Din has to be calm, meaning he has to think through, not just like, usher, no, he did it. How can you do that? Yeah, wrong, do. You have to think, to go to the source. You have to plan. This is exactly when faced with this massive problem, Nehemiah stops and thinks. He doesn't necessarily take counsel with other people. He thinks about it himself. from, I guess, the category the buck stops here. And what does he decide to do? Va'ariva min pasuk zayin, number 7. Va'ariva et achorim et askanim. I censured the upper crust, the noblemen. Va'omra lahem, and I said to them, Masaish be'achiv atem noshim. You are pressing your claims on the loans that you've made. Va'etena lehem kihila gedolah. And I raised a very large crowd against them. What does that mean? I'm not going to explain the whole thing right now because I want to leave that for when we go back through the parak. But he doesn't say that what you're doing is asur, right? He doesn't say that. He says he censured them. Next pasuk chet. And I said to them, we have done our best to buy back our Jewish brothers who were sold to other nations. V'gam atem. In other words, we in other countries, in other times of our history, we've done well when our brothers were brought into slavery, we've been captured, we've done well to bring them back. Now he's saying now to these people who are the rich people, V'gam atem, and also you. He said to them, also, are you going to sell your brothers so that we have to be brought back and sold back to us? In other words, you put this community at large in a very precarious, difficult situation. They were quiet. They didn't find an answer. They had nothing to respond, which is very interesting when you think about it. Because what would be the response if you were the rich people that were holding the papers, literally the papers? It'd be like, what are you looking at me for? It's right here in black and white. He gave me his field. He owed me 10,000 shekel. He didn't have the money. What am I supposed to do? Just give him the 10,000 shekel and be done with it? So there were certain things, but they were quiet. They didn't say anything. Zion. I'm sorry, Pasuk Yud, number 10. I, my brothers, my servants, we all have claims of money and grain against them. We should abandon all those claims. I skipped a pasuk. Sorry, I knew it didn't make sense. Number 9, Tet. It's not good what you're doing. We have to go in the way of God. And we should not act the way that we're acting and leave room for other countries that we should be the embarrassment and shame to other countries. Now, I said we were going to go through the whole parak. I decided I'm not going to continue here. I'm going to focus on this pasuk here and go show you a couple of slides we're going to talk about. Because this pasuk has every pasuk does, but this one has a lot of weight in this discussion we need to have. You'll notice he doesn't say what you're doing is asur. I said this before. He doesn't say what you're doing is against halacha. He says it's 3 things. Number 1, lo tova davar. It's not good what you're doing. You're supposed to go your life in a God-fearing way. And number 3, as they say in Yiddish, it's a shanda for the goyim. What would the goyim say? Okay. So what we're going to do is take a look. I'm not going to continue the parak now. I'm going to take a look at a couple of slides. Just a minute. Get it set up. Yeah, call you that up here. And go to screen share. Okay. This is the Malbim on this pasuk. Let's take a look at it. Halo birat Elokeinu telechu, echarpat hagoyim oivenu. Shegam im einchem yirei Hashem, veinchem charedim mimitzvot haTorah. Even if you're not God-fearing and are not, this doesn't mean charedim in the modern sense. It means like trembling before God, so to speak, and keeping every mitzvah. Tzrichim atem b'hachreach lehitraot, ki ilu atem olchim umitnagim yirat Hashem, kedei shelo tisu cherpa min hagoyim. The perspective of the Malbim is very interesting, and I think different from almost every other commentator. He said what the Nehemiah is telling him is the following: wait, it's not really right what you're doing. or it's not the right thing to do, and it's also a shanda for the goyim. But he's telling him, even if you're not a true Yirei Hashem, you're not a true God-fearing person, at least take this into consideration. When the non-Jews see what's happening here, the social injustice, the haves versus the have-nots, and the poverty it's causing, what are the goyim going to say? That's the perspective of Malvi. However, let's take a look at a pasuk in Sefer Shemot. V'izharta etem, you shall warn them. Et hachukim ve'et hatorot, the statutes, the laws, mean the mitzvot of Hashem. Hodata lahem et haderech yelchu bah. Hashem says to Moshe, you should teach them, show them the way which they should go down. Et ha'ma'aseh asher ya'asun, and the act they should do. Now, you'll notice, Moshe says, or is going to say to Am Yisrael, Hashem tells them to say, to keep the chukim and torot. What does this mean? The ma'aseh asher ya'asun, the act they shall do. I'm going to read to you, I have it here in English and Hebrew, Gemara, Bava Metzia, Lamed Amud Bet. So he quotes the pasuk, the words, asher ya'asun, zo lifnin mishurat hadin. What does that mean? It means to go beyond the letter of the law. I'm going to come back to this. Rabbi Yochanan said, Lo chava Yerushalayim ela al shadanu badin Torah. The reason Yerushalayim was destroyed was because they judged the law in the court case based on Torah law. Wait, what? That's what you're supposed to do, no? Ela dine de megizda ledayenu ela ema she'emidu dinehem al din Torah v'lo avdu lifni mishurat hadin. You see in English, it says here, it says, wait a minute. The Gemara asks, rather, what else should they have done? Should they rather have adjudicated based on the arbitrary decisions, de magazita? That's just something arbitrary. Of course, you have to judge based on Torah law. Our answers, they established the rulings not just on Torah law, but they did it on Torah law. But they never went beyond the letter of the law. What does that mean? We know that Hashem has multiple dimensions. It's a poor way of putting it. We know that Hashem created the world with midat hadin, the midah, the characteristic or character trait of din. Because that's why the first chapter of Breshit is the name Elohim. The second parak, it starts with use the word Yud Kei Vav Kei Ado and Nai, which is the midah of Rachamim. To teach us something very important, that whereas the law, the halacha, may be X, sometimes there needs to be looking lifnim mishurat hadin. In English, we say beyond the letter of the law. In Hebrew, we say lifnim, inside the parameters of the law. And because there was no mercy, there was no rachamim, everything was 100% black and white, that caused, as according to one opinion, was the cause of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. It is this is a digression now for a second. It's a very difficult way to live Torah life, that everything is black and white. I'm not talking about clothes. It's a very difficult way to live when you see halacha is black and white, because it's absolutely not. Sometimes it is, obviously. Can you eat basar v'chalav? Can you eat meat and milk together, black and white? No, except when you're allowed to, when there's certain circumstances where you might be able to. Are you allowed to drive on Shabbat? Black and white? No. Well, until you're allowed to. Meaning, very few things are absolutes. And when you don't, and none of that had to do with rachamim or din. But the time period of before the destruction, according to one opinion, was that because the judges were not doing lifnim mishurat hadin, that caused a breakdown in the fabric of the society and ultimately led to the destruction of Beit HaMikdash. There is a concept of lifnim mishurat hadin and also the asita yashar v'hatov, to do what's right and proper. Of course, we're supposed to do what's right and proper. What does that mean? So the example I'd like to give, I think I just gave this last week in Mesilat Yesharim, was we know that if you find an object that has a siman, it has some kind of a sign on it that it says, my name on it, my phone number, then you have to return it. However, if you find it in such a place, in such a situation where you know 100% I've given up hope on it, you find a phone of mine underneath a bush that's been there obviously since last winter. You know that I gave up hope on it. Technically, you could take it home and keep it. Use it all you want. However, you should do that which is right and straight, which means that you do return it. You get the double mitzvah. You get the mitzvah Asita Yashar V'Tov and the mitzvah Hashavat Aveda, returning a lost object. This is the issue that Nehemiah is faced with right now. All the people, all the upper crust, the haves, who put the have-nots in this situation, legally, halachically, technically, they had every right to do what they were doing. Question is, yes, but let me just finish the sentence.
Okay.
The question, wait 1 second. The question is, was it the right thing to do? Putting aside for a second the second half of the puzzle, Malbim connects them. I'm separating them as most of the other Farshim do. Okay, yeah, go ahead, Aryeh.
What about Allah? I think it's in Vayikra Devarim. I'm not sure where. I haven't looked it up. If you take a mashkon, you have to give it back so they can sleep at night. They can work with it. If they have their field and they can't get to it,
right,
that's against the Torah.
Right. So that's why, no, so it specifically doesn't talk about the things. That's why it talks about people and their fields and their vineyards. Fields and vineyards do not fall in that category. It's work utensils,
It doesn't go to fields. Okay.
And the clothing, the blankets. Right. You're right. So if it were those things, they would absolutely be going against halacha. Correct. If they didn't return it every night. Correct. But in
I also have a question when you have a chance.
Sure.
So I was understanding it originally that, especially when they kept saying, that the Goyim would see that it was an issue of Chilul Hashem. But now it doesn't sound like it's that anymore.
Okay.
So
very good. So that's what I'm saying. What you're saying is based on what the Malbim said, that he's connecting the two halves. Meaning, the first half of the pasuk is it's not okay. It's not proper to do what you're doing because it's a Chilul Hashem. But I'm saying, as many other Mefarshim we're going to see next week, there's two statements. Number one, what you're doing is not right. It's not Vasita Yashar V'Tov. B'nosaf Lazayin, in addition to that, it's also Chilul Hashem. What are the guy going to say? That the Jews are causing other Jews to live in poverty. And this is why I'm also saying that it's the whole idea of social justice and this idea of the haves and have-nots and poverty and rich. No, we're living in a capitalistic society. We live in a democratic society, at least for the most part. And it's a topic that's a very common topic here in Israel. The whole concept of poverty, whether it's self-imposed by some people, some just have no choice. It becomes what it is. But here, what he's talking about is that the people, the nations around Israel, who remember we've been given this permission by the king, by Koresh, and then eventually by Artaxerxes to do what we're doing. But it's still, we're not. This isn't Israel that we know it. This isn't Medinat Israel. This is the ancient country where we're under the thumb always of somebody else. So just 75, a little less than 75 years ago. So the eyes of everyone, as they are always on us till this very day, whether it's the United Nations or the United States government or somewhere, except for Micronesia, who loves us, always is saying what we're doing is wrong, right? Always has got some kind of complaint. So he's saying this is a big one, that this idea of causing your fellow Jew to have this, what appears to be a massive problem of poverty. It's not just that you're doing something wrong. It may be halachically okay, but it's not the right thing to do. It's also a Chilul Hashem, as they say for the Goyim. We'll do Bezrat Hashem. We'll pick it up. Let me just double check the calendar here. Next week is, come on, next Sunday night, the 27th. Bezrat Hashem, we should have class, and we'll pick it up on this whole topic next week. Again, I close with what I started with. We should wish a refuah shlema to Avram ben Bluma. Should be refuah shlema, complete and mamash bekarov.
Amen.
Right.
Thank you.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you.